Cloud. There we go. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in our kitchen. It tends to be thought, I think, sometimes that Pesach cleaning is difficult, it is challenging, it's time-consuming. The first point I think I'd like to make is, they say the story of a woman who calls up the Rav and says, Rabbi, she says, I can't move the couch. It's just too heavy. So he says, well, why don't you just wait till your husband comes home? So she says, how's that going to help? It'll be all much heavier when he's on it. That's not going to help me. So there is, of course, a serious point, which is nowhere in Shulchan Aruch does it say that the woman has to do the preparing for and cleaning. It is as much, if I may say this, it is as much a mitzvah on every member of the household, but on the man as much as the woman. How you decide to divide up the labor, that's your business. But let's not forget, this is a mitzvah for the whole household. So let's start with the important things, and let's put it into some context. This has nothing to do with cleaning. Nowhere does it say in halacha your house has to be clean for Pesach. Your house has to be free of chametz. That's all that matters. Now, I'm sure your houses are all incredibly clean, but that's not actually what this is about tonight. This is not about cleaning. This is about how do I make sure that I comply with the halachic requirements of making sure that I do not, and I'm going to give you the technical details in a minute, because of course there are two separate prohibitions, two separate isurim min haTorah, and it's very important that we don't forget which is which, because they have different details. They operate differently. One is not to eat chametz. No, you're not allowed to eat chametz on Pesach, and it doesn't matter who that chametz belongs to. You may not eat chametz. And there is a separate prohibition. You may not possess, you may not own chametz on Pesach. And they have different requirements. Let me tell you what Reb Moshe Feinstein Zichrono Livracha very famously said. He said, if I did all the cleaning for Pesach in my apartment, he said, it would take me 3 hours. Now, I don't know how big Reb Moshe Feinstein's apartment was, but I imagine it wasn't massive, but he probably had 1 or 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, you know, the basics he must have had like everybody else. And he said that it would take him 3 hours to prepare his house to be ready and chametz free. Now, that in itself is perhaps a little bit of a chiddush, because I'm sure most people spend a lot more than that. But here's the real chiddush. He says, of those 3 hours, he said, I would spend 2 hours, 15 minutes in the kitchen, and 45 minutes will be for the rest of the whole house. And this tells us something really, really important. And we really have to remember this. When it comes to making sure that I do not possess chametz, that I get rid of chametz in the rest of the house, it's actually very easy. It's very straightforward. Let me explain to you how and why. Because when the Torah says you may not own chametz, what the Torah is saying is you may not own a kazayis of chametz. Now, first of all, we have to understand what is chametz. This word we use, this word chametz, what is chametz? So the first thing we need to remember is that chametz is food. Something that is not food, it cannot be chametz. Something that you would not put into your mouth is not chametz. Okay? So what are we looking for? We are looking for, when we are in the rest of the house, we're going to start off with the rest of the house because that really is the easy bit. We need to make sure that, the way I always say it is as follows. Take a regular room. Take a regular room. There is no requirement in halacha to sweep the floor. You don't even need to sweep the floor. Nowhere does it say that you have to sweep. Well, it does. It talks about sweeping. But what are you looking for in terms of possession of chametz? You are looking for pieces of chametz. You're not looking for crumbs. Crumbs on the floor are not chametz. When was the last time you went down on the floor and picked up food or crumbs off the floor? Even if it's a Cheerio or one pretzel. Well, when was the last time you went down on the floor? The minute it's on the floor, it's dirty. You don't pick it up and eat it. And therefore, really, the floors, the cupboards, what are you looking for? You're not looking to get rid of tiny crumbs, because any crumbs that are on the floor or in a drawer are not going to be edible. You're not going to pick them up and eat them. And therefore, you don't really need to be concerned about them at all. What you are looking for is maybe you've forgotten. Maybe one of the kids, let's say, for example, they're in their school satchels. So maybe they left some pretzels from 2 weeks ago. Now it's not that dirty. It's a pretzel, it's 2 pretzels, it's 3 pretzels, it's in the school satchel, but that takes 1 minute to get rid of. You check them, chuck them out, finished. The drawers, when was the last time? If you do not put biscuits in your drawers, if you do not put pretzels in your drawers, then you check them very, very quickly. It really doesn't take a long time. Ramosha Feinstein is telling us that in the rest of the house, 45 minutes is enough. Because as far as owning chametz is concerned, possessing chametz, balye roeh u balye motzeh, not to possess chametz, that's really quite straightforward to get rid of. That's really not a problem. What we do want to put all of our koches into, and this is a whole different story, which is why we're in the kitchen. What's so special about the kitchen? Well, as you can see, there's something very special about the kitchen. A Jewish kitchen, of course, is the nerve center, right? But as far as chametz is concerned, here is where it really gets serious. Here's the serious stuff. Because you see, usually, when the Torah says do not eat something, so for example, the Torah says do not eat something that's not kosher, chazir, right? Pork, bacon. What does that mean when the Torah says don't eat bacon? It means a kazayas, an olive, how much exactly? 27 to 30 grams or volume of olive, a matchbox size, more or less, of bacon. That is forbidden to eat min haTorah. If you eat, now that doesn't mean you're allowed to go, to McDonald's and say, could I have a tiny piece? Of course not. You're not allowed to do that. But normally we have rules which, when there is a small amount, really small amount of something which is not kosher, it becomes botel, it becomes annulled. It's so much easier. Meat and milk, a little bit of milk falls into your cholent. Doesn't matter. You call up the rabbi, a little bit of milk fell into my cholent. The rabbi will tell you, eat it, gesundheit, no problem. Not a problem. It is botel b'shishim, a volume of 1 in 60. It's null, it's insignificant. It is considered halachically as if it doesn't exist anymore. And for some reason, not the point of tonight's shir, when it comes to chametz, everything turns and reverses on its head. The Chazal said that chametz is forbidden, the smallest crumb of chametz is forbidden. And that is why the kitchen becomes the focus. The rest of the house, you get rid of it, and then you sell it, and then you say kol chamira, you say you mevatel it, you annul it, you declare it ownerless and hefker, not a problem. But eating chametz has got nothing to do with who it belongs to. If 1 crumb of chametz fell into the world's largest pot of kosher Pesach chicken soup, you would not be able to eat the whole thing. So here, and that's only the beginning of your problems, because the second part, of course, is that we have a halachic concept, which is called ta'am. Ta'am is geschmack, taste. When you cook something, taste particles are absorbed into the walls of whatever it is you're cooking in, they remain fresh from a halachic perspective for the next 24 hours. And then if that pot is cooked again, those taste particles exit into whatever it is you're cooking. So you will all know the halacha. You cook meat in a pot, and within 24 hours you cook milk. You have to start working out whether you have the requisite, the right amount, 1 part to 60. After 24 hours, that taste is halachically stale, and min ha-Torah, biblically, it's no longer a problem. It may be a problem rabbinically. Now, when it comes to chametz, we are makpid. We are particular. The smallest amount is a problem, and it's severe. The Torah, this is one of the very few things where if one eats chametz, we know from what the Torah says there is kores, which is the most severe form of punishment. And this is the Hashem's way of telling us chametz, eating chametz on Pesach is a massive no-no. And that is why we do go to some extreme to ensure that we do not chas v'shalom eat the smallest amount of chametz on Pesach. That is the basis for it. That is the basic idea. Now, how does this translate? How does this translate into practice? Which is why we are here in the kitchen. So, in days of old, people had very, very limited money and economic means, and the idea of having 2 sets of dishes or 2 sets of crockery, of glasses, drinking glasses, nobody could afford that. And therefore, Chazal discussed all of the halachas of koshering. Now, and we're going to talk in a second about the different types of koshering and how that would apply to the different appliances that we have today. And therefore, the first point I want to make, and obviously, I suppose I really should have said this possibly before by means of introduction, some of what I'm going to say tonight will be, for some of you, you might consider it to be very strict, and for some of you, you might consider it to be very lenient. And I know there's no way you can't win. I'm not trying to. There are a range of opinions on a number of the things I'm going to say. So if anything I say, you feel for whatever reason doesn't really work for you, so to speak, then reach out to me privately. But what I have to do this evening is lay down the rules, the basic approaches. A quick story. When my previous kehillah in Edgware, there was a certain wonderful woman who, one year I gave the shir, as I did every year, and we were talking about dishwashers as it happens. And then she came and asked me, and I mentioned that I wasn't very happy about koshering the dishwashers for Pesach. And she said to me, "But Rabbi, I asked you 3 years ago, and you said that I could. Has the halacha changed?" And I said, "No, but thankfully you have." Because I knew her well, I knew the family well, and I knew what was appropriate and what was right, how strict it was right to be for her and her family. So I'm saying that by way of introduction. Okay. So having said that, let's get down to the principles. Okay. So the first thing I would say, and again, let's take, for example, let's just start with a simple thing like drinking glasses. Okay. So what did they do in times gone by? They did let's say this is never used for anything hot, right? This is only used for something cold. I may have had whiskey in this, possibly, right? It may have been used for something cold. So there was a process called milui ve'irui, whereby you would put water in it 3 times over 3 24-hour periods, and it would then be used for Pesach. Ashkenazim and Sfardim still do that, because it's subject to an argument between the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah, but Ashkenazim generally don't do that. And today, because generally speaking, you can get relatively cheap drinking glasses. So therefore, this is a halacha which very much has fallen into disuse. People don't use it very much anymore. So we need to remind ourselves, and you need to think for yourself, what is appropriate. So for example, when we're going to talk about microwaves, I don't know, maybe it's worthwhile, depending on, you can get microwaves now for about 50 euros. And if you're only going to use it for 1 week a year, it'll last you for 20, 30 years. And maybe that is a worthwhile investment. So you always have to, prioritize and work out what is, how much to be lenient and which areas to be lenient on. So let's start going principle by principle and then appliance by appliance. But before I do that, I just want to make one more, I think, really important point. A lot of these notes I've taken from notes. There was a very famous, a big tzaddik and a posek, the late, great Hagoyna tzaddik or Pinchas Scheinberg, Zecher Tzaddik Livrocha, you may have heard of him. And he would give this shiur. He was famous for giving this shiur every year in Mattersdorf in Yerushalayim. And he called the shiur Clean for Pesach and Enjoy the Seder. That's what the shiur was called. I've got the notes here. I can even send them to you. Clean for Pesach and Enjoy the Seder. Because there is a trade-off. And we must always remember this. If one spends extra energy and time cleaning in a way that is unnecessary, if the cost of that will be that when it comes to the Seder, that you as a mother is unable, just feel like a schmatter and you're finished and you're unable to recharge your spiritual batteries through the Seder and enjoy, yes, enjoy and be there, be present, be awake, be present, be part of it. There is a cost, there is a trade-off. I see there's a question here. Okay, the answer is yes, I will. Because often when one is a little bit more strict, maybe that is a chumrah. That is a stringency that might not even be at the level of a rabbinic obligation. But remember, for women, exactly in the same way as men, on Seder night, all of the mitzvahs are exactly the same. The mitzvah to eat matzah, min haTorah, is your mitzvah as much as it is a man's mitzvah. Haggadah, every single mitzvah, when it comes to Seder night, which is the Rosh Hashanah of Emunah, that's what it is. It is the one opportunity where Hashem gives us the ability to create a bank, a reservoir of emunah, which we need and will dip into throughout the rest of the year. If you're unable to do so because you scraped dishes which you are then going to sell, then that's not right either. There is a trade-off. So I do really want to stress that point very strongly. Having said that, let's now get into the principles. And maybe I'll pick up with what I just said a minute ago. Any kalim or dishes that you are going to include in the mechira, in the sale of chametz, you do not need to clean them. The Gentile who buys them does not care whether they are clean or not. First of all, he doesn't buy the dishes. He buys the chametz that is on the dishes, because otherwise you'd have to do tevilas kalim afterwards. But if you are going to, whatever you're going to sell and put away, there's no point, you don't need to clean it or scrape it at all. It's a waste of time. It has no halachic significance at all. Take it, dump it in the cupboard and mark it, sold, Pesach, chametz, whatever you want to write on it, finished. And that would be an absolutely unnecessary energy. Let's begin to go now through the principles of koshering. Now, the Torah tells us that it is possible to extract. The basic rule in koshering is a halachic concept called kaboiloi kachpoltoi. In the same way that it was absorbed, that is the way that it is extracted. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean? It means, because there are a number of different ways of absorbing taste. It can be through the medium of liquid or of fire, of direct heat. And they have very different halachas. There is one leniency in Hilchas Pesach that we have something called roiv tashmishai, which means that if you have an item that is most of the time is used in a particular manner and is only occasionally used in another way, you can be lenient and kasher it with the method that is appropriate for the more lenient one. Let me give you an example. Let's start off with the most obvious one, the one that most people know, hagala, a pot. What do you do with a pot? You put liquid in it and you cook. So you have noodles in your pot. So what happens? You have water. The absorption of those taste particles is through the medium of liquid. So what you would need to do is, and this, by the way, we will be having a service in Yetz Hashem. I think it already went out in the newsletter on Sunday the 21st. The exact time still has to be sent out, but there will be a koshering service. Now, it's important for everybody to know that anything that you are going to be bringing for koshering must not have been used hot in the previous 24 hours. There are two main conditions for koshering something, for doing hagala. Number one, it must not, the taste particles within that vessel, whatever it is, we want them to be already downgraded from d'oraisa, from fresh taste particles, to d'rabbanon. In other words, they will not have been used hot within the last 24 hours. And number two, and this is really important, and that is they need to be spotlessly clean, totally spotlessly clean. What is the best way of working out whether something is clean? I'll tell you how. That's the best way. Your fingers. The ends of your fingers are sensitive to about 10 to 15 microns. You close your eyes and you rub your fingers across when, let's say, we'll come to the oven shortly, we'll talk about that. You can tell straight away. So if an item has been used within the last 24 hours hot, or if it is not clean, you can't kasher it. So back to a pot. The way to kasher a pot, very simple. If you want to take your pot that you used for chametz, for noodles, you clean it thoroughly, make sure it hasn't been used for within the last 24 hours for hot, and then it is enveloped, it is put into boiling water. When I say boiling, I mean bubbling. It has to be actually actively bubbling. A point that people sometimes don't realize is it's not like Tvilas Kalim. It doesn't all have to go in at one point. You can do it in parts. You can put one part in and then another part in. It is then rinsed in cold water. That is kashering. Okay? That is the basics of Hagala. Where it becomes more complicated is when you have something that is used through the application of direct heat, such as an oven. Okay? I don't know where my camera person is. Oh, right on cue. Look at that. Very impressive. Okay, so we're going to just 1 second. Let me just talk a little bit more about an oven. Okay, I don't know if you can see it there. Yes. So we are actually very blessed in that this is a proper self-cleaning oven. It's pyrolytic. So yes, and I am told yes, it's only slightly more expensive than the other ones. Fine. So the beauty of this gets really, really hot. I forgot whether it's about 700 or 800 degrees Celsius, something like that. It's a crazy thing. I mean, you can tell because you actually need to take the racks out. You're not meant to leave the racks in. You leave them in. I know, but you're not meant to. That's okay, fine. So that's the lazy way of doing it. So there's another tip for free. Just leave them in even though you're not meant to. Now, how that works is as follows. Because something that is used through the application of direct heat, really needs to have something which is called libun chomor, which is, sorry, you're shaking the whole thing, which libun chomor means it is, sparks have to fly off it. That's the lashon in halacha. There have to be sparks flying off it, and that is incredibly hot. Generally speaking, unless you apply a blowtorch properly to each part, it's not really practical. Therefore, if you are lucky enough to have a pyrolytic oven, great. Now, if you don't, here is where the fun starts. Because you cannot get the oven really up to the level, the temperature that it should do what is called libun chomor. there is a big machlokas in the poskim about whether we can use the following leniency, which we generally do. What is it? Leave the oven for 24 hours, make sure it hasn't been used hot for 24 hours, and then clean it very thoroughly. And I mean clean it very thoroughly. There are different types of ovens, and sometimes on the inside they're made of different materials. And another issue that can be is that at the back you have a fan. Often you have a fan blade, and there is stuff that can occasionally get caught there. And you're not going to start unscrewing and taking off the back of the oven. You don't quite need to do that, but you do need to use St. Moritz or whatever it is, the really strong stuff, to make sure it is properly clean. And then we rely, according to many poskim, on a leniency of, again, it's a form of kaboilo kachpolte, which means because it only ever reaches a maximum temperature of 300 degrees or whatever it is, therefore you don't need to get it right up to the highest level of libun chomor. And therefore what you can do is you just put it on for maximum setting, let it reach maximum heat for about an hour, and then you're done. If you want to be really frum, you can subsequently then, when some people do this, I'm just telling you afterwards, you can still, as a chumrah, make sure that when you subsequently cook for it on Pesach, that you don't cook anything uncovered. It's a bit of a chumrah, but that is basically the oven. Right, let's move on. Let's move on to, I think we're going to move on to the sink. Let's just do this yeah, you have to pull that out and move the rest along with it, unless you just move the camera along with it, because there are different materials. The Torah says very clearly that what happened was we had a battle with Midian, and subsequently we found ourselves in possession with lots and lots of kalim. And there the Torah tells us what and how you can and should kasher. So there are some materials which can be kashered. Here's one that people always get wrong for some weird reason, I don't quite know. People always say to me, oh, you can't kasher wood, can you? Of course you can, it's a posuk in the Torah. Of course wood can be kashered. You do need to make sure, by the way, wood sometimes has cracks in it. Depends, the wood would have to be smooth. If something has cracks or crevices in it, that makes it a bit of a problem for kashering, just because you can't get properly in it. But in principle, it can be. So let's talk. I'm going to move the camera now. I'll do it as best as I can without making it too wobbly. Here we go. Now, if your sink is, if it's metal like this, so that's the best. That's the easiest. Okay? What would you do? Again, you would do two things. Number one, you would stop. You would not use it for anything hot for 24 hours. You would then clean it very thoroughly. Also, you can sometimes have where the sink gets a little bit blocked and stuff can sort of come back up. So you would also pour a bit of bleach or something down here as well. You would then clean it thoroughly. You then have to dry it. You cannot kasher it if it is at all wet. So that would be no good at all. It would have to be bone dry, totally clean. And then what you do is you boil up a kettle. I'm not going to do that now. My wife thinks she's going to get kashering in for free. We're doing it Motzei Shabbos. It's already in my diary. Sorry. So you then boil up a kettle. Now here's some important points. There are potentially different halachic standards as to how to do this. I will give you two. One of them is a little bit stricter than the other, and it has some advantages. And it's also going to depend to some extent on what you're then going to do with the sink. Are you going to then just leave the sink as it is and use it as it is over Pesach? Or do you intend using an insert or a bowl or covering it with silver foil? Different people do different things. So I would say as follows. If you are not going to use a bowl or an insert or cover it with silver foil, the method of kashering it through boiling water is good enough. There is an added level which I hesitate from saying the word should be done, but can be done, and it does add an extra layer. And I'll explain what it's called: an Evan Hamaluban, which means a heated up, something which is heated up to maintain the heat of the water as it hits the surface to kasher it. This can be done through, we used to have, they actually produced it in England. I'm not sure if we brought it with. It came with, it was like a brick, literally it was a brick, which we used to heat up. But it came, it came from America. They had it with a long handle, and we would heat it up on the stove, and then put it in the sink. And then when you pour the boiling water on it, it maintains the heat and it bubbles. Because the problem you have is as follows: if you're not going to remember your sink, according to many poskim, has the din of a keli rishon. You will have had hot noodles in the sink, right? You will have had hot chametz in the sink. So you really need to be relatively strict about the sink. So if you're not going to cover it and you're going to use hot water to kosher it, you can't just simply boil up a kettle and then just pour it over, because it remains at optimal heat, at bubbling heat, for a second or two. I would say for a sink such as this, I would usually use 3 kettles at least to kasher this particular sink. Why? What would I do? So what I would do is as follows. I would plug it in somewhere really straightforward, straight next to the sink, and keep my finger on the to make it. If we don't have those old-fashioned kettles, keep it as hot, boiling hot as you can, and then start from here and work your way up. I would be able to get maybe 1 kettle load here, then another one here, then maybe another one here, and then we'll come to the taps. Now, in this tap, we're very lucky that you can just pour boiling water on, unscrew it, look at the filter. If you don't have that, again, you would pour boiling water over it. What are we concerned about? We're concerned about steam, because steam has halachic significance. And if you will have had potentially boiling hot noodles sitting there occasionally, and the steam would have gone up, that is chametz absorption, which at least at a Rabbanon level after 24 hours is still significant. So that is kashering your sink. Now, here's where things get a little bit more complicated. If your sink is made of enamel or china, you've got a problem. It just simply cannot be kasher. There's nothing you can do about it. Now, plastic. Plastic is one of the big areas of controversy in kashering for Pesach. There are some poskim who hold that you can kasher plastic for Pesach, and there are many who hold that you can't. My advice, therefore, is if you are going to kasher your plastic sink for Pesach, it is a good idea also to try and cover it as much as you can. Okay, I'm using my words very carefully. And now this is going to be relevant also for the next thing, which is my surfaces. If you can't take out the filter, how do you kasher it? You don't need to really. You just clean it. Usually most of them underneath you are able to unscrew them, even if you don't have the extendable thing like I have. And you usually are able to unscrew them. Now, here we have, I suppose, what is a plasticky formica, whatever it's called, type of surface. So what do we do with this? So again, what we're going to do is I will clean it. Now, the truth is here we can afford to be a little bit more, well, it's not a trick as such, but I'll somebody just asked here, a trick. I don't do tricks. I'm not a magician. It's very straightforward. The method that I outlined about kashering the sink, that is, if you do that properly. Oh, you mean the using the Evan, I presume you mean. So if you want to do it better in order to not necessitate covering it, which is, I presume, what you're asking, then you would take, it doesn't have to be just a brick. You've got to be careful, obviously, safety, wear gloves, etc. Some years I would take a screwdriver and put the screwdriver on the ring for 5 minutes or so till it got red hot, and then put it in the sink as I poured the hot water on it, and therefore it actually sizzles, and it ensures that the connection between the water and the sink is halachically upgraded, and then there would be no need to cover it. Okay, right, let's get back onto this. Now here you actually have a leniency which you can rely on. How often would you say you actually put hot chametz, keli rishon, that means really hot chametz, directly on the surface? What's the maximum that's usually going to happen? You'll have a plate of noodles or a pot of noodles, and maybe one will spill. The minute it comes out of a keli rishon and falls onto your surface, that's keli sheni. Keli sheni einay mevashel. It can't be mevashel. So the truth is, there is room. I'm more prepared to be lenient and say that the surface, even if it's made of plastic, given that there is a machlokas whether you can or can't kasher plastic, but what is the likelihood? We again, remember I said when it comes to kashering for Pesach, we talk about roiv tashmishay. Most of the time, we are civilized human beings. We have plates, we have pots. We don't take boiling hot noodles and have them directly on our surface. So the number of times and the likelihood that there was boiling hot chametz, keli rishon chametz on your surface is minimal. And therefore, clean them thoroughly, pour boiling water on them, and then if you want to cover them, you can cover them. There is a minhag Yisrael for people to cover them, but you don't have to. Okay? Right, I hope that's clear. Let's move on to the rings. Now, this is what we've got, and I'll tell you why. As you can see, we've got the old-fashioned. It took us a while to actually find them. They're not so easy to find. And one of the main reasons I went for the old-fashioned, the truth is I personally am a fan of gas, but they didn't seem to have it. So I know many people today have either one of two things. They either tend to have the ceramic, the halogen tops, or even more problematic from a halachic perspective for Pesach is, if you're lucky enough, they're expensive and they cook incredibly well, is the induction. Okay, so let's go through the three types. I'll try and do this quite simply. So the ones that we have, as you saw, just the basic electric ring, that's really relatively straightforward, because anything that goes, you don't have a milky and a fleshing one. Maybe you are, maybe you're much frummer than me, but you don't. The rings we just use for anything. How come? Surely stuff spills over. The answer is, as soon as it spills over, it gets miyad nisraf. It immediately gets burnt up. And therefore, to kasher this really doesn't take long at all. We clean thoroughly. What I do is, we'll make sure we clean this all very thoroughly until I use my fingers again, until I can't feel anything at all. And I do pour boiling water on the bits in between. And then I turn each of these on in turn for 10 minutes until they are properly red hot. And as we say in England, Bob's your uncle. That's it. Job done. Okay, that's that. We cover in between these. That's if you've got this sort. If you have the ceramic or the halogen, you've got a bit more of a problem because of the way that they work. Don't pour boiling water onto them. They will crack. That's not a good idea. What you can do is you clean them. You clean them thoroughly. You turn them on to the maximum heat for 10 minutes or so. It is a good idea, and I know in England they sell these things where you can have these sheets of a special thing called mica, M-I-C-A. Don't know if you get them here, because where the problem is going to be is because on the ceramic rings, the minute you move away from the source of heat, then it's not boiling hot, right? So chametz will have fallen on there during the year, boiling hot, and you don't have a way of kashering it. You can't pour hot water on it because it'll smash. So really you should try and cover. Now you have to know how to do this safely, and that's not my expertise. I know in England they used to sell these special sheets which you cut out on the side of them, but any spillage is there and you do have a problem. And that's one of the reasons we decided not to get these. And induction, you cannot really kasher induction for Pesach. Last year, I think it was Yael Melini very kindly sent me, and I put it on and I'll send it out again. There is something on Amazon because induction is very brilliant the way that it works. And there is a rubber mat that you can buy that can go on there, and that lechura would be your option. Okay, that's that. Let's go on, microwaves. Microwaves is an interesting one. There are different opinions about microwaves, that's the truth. If the first problem that you will encounter potentially is if the walls of the microwave are plastic, you immediately hit the machlekas about whether or not to kasher plastic. But even assuming that they are metal, many poskim are not happy with kashering microwaves for a bunch of different reasons, which I won't necessarily go into. On the other hand, there are poskim, and it must be said, there are poskim, very eminent poskim, who say that it's okay. So then if you are to kasher your microwave, what would you do? You would leave it for 24 hours. You would clean it very, very thoroughly till it is actually totally spotlessly clean. Use your fingers again, always as the test. And then you would put in a cup of water and steam it for 5 to 7 minutes. According to some person, I should say you should even do it twice. You then have the problem potentially also of the glass turntable should either be replaced, ideally it should be replaced, or covered properly. And that means double covered. That's if you're going to do that. We then move on, I think, to one of the most contentious ones of all, which is the dishwasher. Now, welcome to my dishwasher. Which one should I use? Let's do this one. So, whoops, there we go. So there you can see, so this is definitely not ready to be cashed. So the first thing you see immediately is, I've got plastic here. I've got loads of plastic. Another thing, by the way, that you would potentially need to be worried about, I don't know if we have this here, we brought this one with us. If any of the plastic racks are cracked or chipped, then you can't casher it also. And then the other problem, we should have thought of this before. Let's see if I can do this. I hope you've had your supper already. I don't want to. Can you see Raquel on the back of my?
Yeah, I'll do.
Under here, you've got a lot of fun stuff. I don't know if you've ever done this. Under here, and then down there, right, there's all the wonders of the world. And a lot of stuff that is down there is food. Some of it is potentially still edible, and it can back up and come up. And that really is potentially another halachic issue. Changing the filter, there are all sorts of complications. Plus, many of the modern dishwashers have the heating element in them, and yet they don't necessarily reach the required heat. So for a whole number of reasons, I personally am quite uncomfortable, if I'm honest, about kashering dishwashers for Pesach. We certainly don't. If somebody feels that they absolutely cannot manage without their dishwasher, then you have to do a couple of things. You have to check that every bit of plastic there is in perfect condition, is not chipped or cracked. You really need to take out the filter. If you can buy a new one, it would be even better. You need to basically put your hand down there. It's a lot of fun, trust me, and get all the gunk, try and get all the gunk out, and then run it through at least 2 on the hottest cycles. Of course, you leave it for 24 hours before you do any of this, and 2 of the hottest cycles, and that would be the way. Those that do allow koshering of dishwashers, that would be the way to do it. Where do we go from here? The urn, yes, the urn and the kettle, okay. And here the biggest problem for me every year, of course, is my beloved Heilige coffee machine. That's what I really miss most on Pesach. And hint, hint, my wife was really nice to buy me a Pesach coffee machine, because that's the thing that, if I'm honest, that I really miss the most. So, your urn. Again, I would say you should really get another set of racks. Somebody's just asked me here. It's definitely preferable. It is preferable, yes. Now, if you never put any chametz into this, if you don't put challahs on top of this, then it's really relatively straightforward. One more point I would add, and that is sometimes you have to know that the descaling stuff, you know, when you put in stuff every now and again to descale it, some of them contain vinegar, and they may contain malt vinegar, which might be chametz. So you need to know what you use to descale it. Some of the industrial descalers are okay, but you do need to actually look into that. I have found there was one descaler that was on the market, maybe only in England, maybe not here, that was mamash chametz. And then you heat it up, so that's potentially a problem. So if you don't do that, and you never put challah on top here, and you never put chametz in, then it's relatively straightforward. All you would need to do is maximum is you wash it down, clean it, and maybe pour boiling water over the tap. None of the drinks really that we use, what you might have had ones, a pot noodle or something like that, maybe. So, okay, so clean then it might have been a little bit of steam coming up. So you clean the faucet, clean the tap very carefully, pour boiling water over it, and that's that. And that is basically that. Let me just think. What else? I'm just fridge, freezer is really, really very straightforward. The fridge and freezer just need to be cleaned out. Shouldn't take more than 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and wipe down with you never put anything hot in it. The idea that what we're looking for here in the kitchen is that nothing should enter into the food chain. That's what we're worried about. So back to what we started with, crumbs on the floor, we're really not concerned about. Crumbs on the floor, if they are less than a KAJ, says the Mishnah Berurah, if they are less than a KAJ, and or they are somewhat inedible, it's an incredible lashon of the Mishnah Berurah. He says, "Metunaf kitzas," they are a bit inedible. Half a pretzel on the floor, leave it. It's not going to find its way into the food chain. You're not going to pick it up. It's not going to make its way into your kalim or your dishes. So I really want to stress that. That's really, really important. Where, like Rav Moshe Feinstein says, all of our energies go into the kitchen. Because achilas chametz, eating of chametz, Chazal were very, very strict. It never becomes bottle or annulled, not even in 1,000. But the possession of chametz is easy to get rid of. It's really not difficult. How long does it take to quickly go through the house, turn out the clothes of the pockets of the clothes that you wear? You don't need to put toothpicks into chairs and kalim and your pockets, toothpicks. You don't need that. It's not food. And all the energy really needs to go into koshering and making sure that no chametz, not the tiniest amount of chametz, will find its way into our mouths, chas v'shalom, over Yom Tov. And if we do it and we put that in the right order, put our energies in the right area, hopefully, it shouldn't be too much of a monster. I'm going to add something that is quite unusual. I will be sending out, I've prepared and they're more or less ready to go to print, but I want to add something that is very different about this year that we haven't had since 94, I think it is, and it won't happen again till 2032, I think. And that is, we have the joy of an Erev Pesach Shechal Liyos b'Shabbos. We have Erev Pesach, which is on Shabbos, which is relatively unusual. So I'm going to quickly take you through, because for the women of the house, this is particularly important in understanding help. What do I do? I've got 24 hours. I've got an Erev Pesach, which has all sorts of unusual and different things. So let me go through 2008 and 2001. You got me. Fine. Okay. Extractor hood, Joel, cover it. That's a real problem. Sorry, I should have mentioned that. Extractor hood is the time change was 94. That's what it is. Thank you, Joel, saved me. The time change was 94. Yes, and that's another problem that we've got. And what we're doing is we're going to be issuing the Zmanim twice, in blue and in red. So some of you may have some radio-controlled clocks at home, but we also have watches which we can't change. So that there's no confusion, it will be in blue and in red, so you'll know old time and new time, so everybody will be on time for davening and for etc. That's already in the works already. So where was I up to? Extractor fan, Joel, yes, potentially a big problem. So therefore, what you really need to do is cover it, because there you will have had zayah, you will have had proper steam will have come up, gathered, and potentially can fall back down. Cover it. Totally cover it. Make sure that it's yes. Good question. Thank you. Now let's go to the Erev Pesach Shechalias b'Shabbos, because this is a lot of fun. Okay, so I'm just going to give you the quick highlights. Again, we've prepared the guides and the times that they'll be coming out very soon. But think about what you need to know. Let's go through from Thursday. Thursday is Tanis Koshering. Okay, doesn't affect you. Okay, it affects me. It means we've got to make a siyum. We then on Friday is not Erev Pesach, but still the minhag is to burn chametz. We have sorted out there will be a streifas chametz of some sort in Bundstrasse on Friday morning. Times and details to go out. This is a minhag. Now, remember, you can eat chametz up until 10:05, if I remember correctly, on Shabbos morning. So now what do I do? What do I cook? What do I cook with? When is the sale of the chametz valid? And then we have the question of what to eat on the Seudas Shabbos. I'll just take you through this very quickly, some of the basic ideas. So, as a minhag, we burn the chametz on Friday morning, okay? The way I am going to do it, and this will be clear in the details that I send out, the sale of your chametz will become valid just before Shabbos enters, okay? So when your husbands or when you yourselves, when you sell the chametz through me, you need to know that besides for the chalus, which you are going to use for Friday night and Shabbos morning, besides for that, you need to treat the rest of the chametz in your house, put it away just before Shabbos. And really, other than the chametz, the challah that you're going to use for lechem mishnah, everything else should really be pesachdik. You could theoretically cook in your chametz pots, say, which hadn't been used for 24 hours. This is what they did in the house of the Chazon Ish. They would cook fish and meat and other things in chametz pots, but then you have a problem. You're not going to know what you're going to eat them with. You can't put them onto your chametz, onto your Pesach dishes. So what you're going to do, you're going to eat them in your chametz dishes and then put them away again. If you've got disposables, I know about the umwelt and everything, and I feel very sorry for it, but that's probably the easiest. So, Friday night, you will now, don't bake or buy too much challah. You need to remember the rest of your house is totally pesachdik, okay? So you need to control that chametz. I have memories as a young child. One of the most exciting, it was very exciting and very different, of eating I think it was in a little plastic bag, the challahs on Friday night. Now, according to some, you can actually have matzahs on Friday night, because the Issur, unless you have a minhag, some people have a minhag not to eat matzahs, either from Purim or Rosh Chodesh Nisan, but if you don't have that minhag, then the only time that it is forbidden to eat matzah is on Erev Pesach. And according to many poskim, that Friday night is not included. Yes? Reb Chaim Brisker brings a proof from the Manish Tana. He says, because what do we say? We say, Shabachol haleilos, on all nights we can eat chametz or matzah. That means every night of the year, theoretically, you could eat chametz or matzah. Therefore, he says, you see, you could eat matzah. So the prohibition to eat matzah on Erev Pesach only starts from the day. So you could theoretically have matzahs Friday night. You could have something called matzah ashira. You could have a type of egg matzahs. You would have to have enough, and it would have to be, you are koveya seuda on them. This is what you're making your seuda on. Generally speaking, the minhag is that we do have challah, but we cook everything, generally speaking, in Pesach kelim. So everything is Pesachdik. You're ready, you cook the fish, the meat, the soup, or whatever it is, the schnitzels, all cooked Pesachdik and eaten Pesachdik. But you wash. When you make Kiddush, there's a halacha, you have to see where you are going to eat. So, depending on your space, you either wash and make Kiddush in another corner of the room. According to the Mishnah Berurah, you can actually move after Kiddush, you can eat in another room. But you would be eating your meal. That's my advice to you, is to make life easy, is the meal should be cooked and eaten Pesachdik. And you have challahs, but you only have a minimal amount, so everybody gets their kazayas. and you then make sure that the crumbs afterwards go into the toilet, the bag gets thrown away, and that's Friday night. Now, Shabbos morning, here's where we have the same problem, but it's different, because here now we have time. Time is not on our side. So you'll be glad to know that your husbands will be davening. Wait for it. 6:45 is the only minyan we're going to have on Erev Pesach. On Erev Pesach, which is Shabbos. Shabbos is 6:45. And which means they will be home. Plan was that they shall be home hopefully by 9. And now you have about an hour and 5 minutes to eat. Now, eat what? Eat. Because the minute it becomes after the time of eating that you can't eat chametz anymore, so what are you going to have for Suda Shlishis? That's the real problem that Tosfos talks about and the Rishonim will talk about. The Arizal, the Ari HaKodesh, learned Torah, he learned Zohar, Maaseh Merkava, that was his Suda Shlishis. But we're not on that level. We need food to keep us going. And really, we should wash. Well, we have to wash for Suda Shlishis. The problem is if you have Suda Shlishis later, you can't wash. You can't have matzah, Tzarech Pesach, you can't have matzah. You certainly can't have chametz, so what do? The Chazon Ish and his family, Mishnah Berurah suggests this is a recommendation. I am aware that it may not work for many of us for time reasons. The recommendation would be, if it's at all possible, to wash, have something very, very minor, bench, go for a short walk, come back, wash again, and have Suda Shlishis. Job done. That seems to be possibly one of the easier and best ways to do it. And now I appreciate it may not work for everybody. Let me also be very clear, this is important. There's one more detail, which is be very, very careful in the disposal of the crumbs of the chametz afterwards, right? Really, they should go down the toilet, and that's the best way of doing it. The minute you start putting it in the bin, and then the bin is still on the communal property, then it's more problematic. So make sure you don't have excess chametz, and make sure you get rid of all the crumbs very carefully and properly, and they don't come into the food chain as we discussed before. And then after having done that, before 11:08, which is the time for Zman HaBiur, your husband, or if you're on your own, you will say Kol Chamira. Kol Chamira is not said on the Friday, the Kol Chamira is said on Shabbos. And then later in the afternoon, you can and should eat, you can have fish, you can even have knedlach, according to the Mishnah Berurah. Having matzah, cake made of matzah meal is possibly problematic. It depends on lots of different things. It depends on the mixture, and it just becomes more complicated. But then you should have later in the day fish, salad, whatever it is. You can actually have knedlach, and that is in short. That is the Seder Hayom. I don't mind. What have I forgotten? A question. Okay, sorry. Maybe I should unmute everybody. Best. Okay. You have to be done with the day kiddush and grace after meal before 10:05. Only eat the chametz. Technically, so just make sure I'm answering the questions here. So technically, you just need to make sure you finished eating chametz. You don't have to bench before 10:04. I don't think so. Once the main thing is you finished your chametz. Okay, that's as a manner. And best to use disposable plastic cover on your set table, then throw it out. Good idea. Okay, I'm up for that. Was there anything else? No, I think that was that. I'm happy to unmute if there are questions, and I fully expect to be, we're already spent quite a lot of the day answering all sorts of different questions. I'm more than happy to unmute everybody in case there is something that I have, it says mute all, I want to unmute. Sorry, bear with me. Okay, so now people should be able to unmute themselves if they want. Let's see if I've done that correctly. Yeah, I think you should be able to. We have a question here. Could I eat usual matzah if we eat on Pesach only the shmura? No, Aliyah, good question. If it is matzah that you could, Okay, it's not such a sorry. I was very quick to respond there. Your question is better than it is better than I originally thought. There is actually a machlokas about this. There was a machlokas between Tzvi Pesach Frank and Ben Uziel about this. You shouldn't. My answer to you is don't. No. I presume, Aliyah, you're talking about Shabbos day, not Friday night. Friday night you can.
We didn't see the question. Can you repeat the question?
Oh, sorry. The question was, could one use, if somebody only eats shmura matzah on Pesach, could you have ret matzah that is not shmura matzah on Friday? The answer, on Shabbos day, the answer is, just to keep it simple, don't. Again, there's not the opportunity to explain all of the reasoning, but don't. Okay. Right. That was all very straightforward, I hope. Here. I didn't see your email, your WhatsApp earlier. Sorry, Noam. I was probably preparing. Noam asks the following question. Can you schedule a delivery from Reve to arrive after Pesach? So, this is a whole separate shir. It was my Shabbos Agadol Drush 3 or 4 years ago, I think. There's a lot of stuff about this. I'll keep it simple. If you order it before Yom Tov, you cannot order it on Chol HaMoed. That's a separate problem. If you order it before Yom Tov to arrive after Yom Tov, according to quite a few poskim, there is room to be lenient. The question is why you would need that, but okay, that's we can't wait till the next day. But assuming that you do need it, it's not something I would advise lechatchila. It's not straightforward, but there are poskim that do allow it because the kinyan only takes place later, etc. But you'd have to order it before Yom Tov, not on Chol HaMoed. Okay, right. Okay, that's it. That's Pesach. It's very simple. It's not difficult at all, is it? I wish you all well. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. I hope it was useful. We will be sending out more detailed guidelines, and I fully expect loads and loads and loads of questions. Okay, take care, everybody. Be well. At Koshering, Freilich and Yom Tov. Kol Tov. Good night. Thank you.